Welcome back to What Do You Know with Nick and Devin. I am Devin.
And I'm Nick.
Thanks for being here, everybody. Nicholas.
Yes.
It's December when this episode is released.
What?
Crazy town.
Bananas.
It's the holiday season.
If you will.
Happy Honda days.
Merry Chrysler.
So what's, with, this whole, holiday season happening, what are you hoping for this Christmas and or holiday season? We kind of last week went over, what traditions or things you do expect every year, but, what are you just kind of hoping for? Are you hoping for just, a bunch of fun family time? Are you hoping for some nice gifts? Sure. Are you just hoping to get it over with as soon as possible?
It's usually the latter. What do you call it? No, I think as we're getting older,
getting up there,
I think actually having some quality time is
sure.
nice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And really being able to enjoy time with people, even though it can get really annoying really quickly. But we're not going to always have that. So just remembering that. No, I do really think outside of, peace on earth, goodwill for all. I do really think being able to make dedicated time, whether that's for myself, whether that's with my family, whether that's, just with Brian, whatever it might be. I think having the ability to just focus on that would be nice.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Definitely.
Maybe go bowling.
Some Christmas bowling.
Some Christmas bowling. There's got to be at least one lane open.
That's got to be a fun tradition.
That's got to be.
Start it.
Devin.
There you go.
Should we go bowling? What are you doing on Christmas?
Bowling with you.
Exactly. You get it. What about you?
I'm just hoping for things to go smooth.
Yeah, baby. I just imagined you as Ben Affleck in that one picture where he's got a cigarette in his hand.
Yeah. That's usually me during this time of year.
If only you smoked.
That'd be dangerous.
It'd be dangerous. Devin would already have a black lung.
Yeah. I have other vices. It's
okay. Touche.
Awesome. So, well, obviously, we're talking about the Christmas holiday season.
Sure.
We talked about it last week. We're going to talk about it again this week. Tis the season.
To be jolly.
So I'm going to ask you, Nick, what do you know about the Christmas truce?
Excuse me. Nothing. Was that between my families? Is that what did you get some home stories? Is that what you're talking about?
No.
Oh, okay. Then no idea.
I've never experienced a Christmas truce.
Fair. I literally have no idea.
Well, phenomenal. I'm going to tell you all about it.
Thank God. Does that have to do in the Falklands?
No. The British are involved, though.
Oh, okay.
So
naturally.
So we're going to be time traveling again. It's been my latest hobby. So hop in, enjoy the trip. We're going back 110 years to 1914 Europe. Oh. World War I has just started and things on the front lines are looking bleak.
Ooh.
Yeah, well, that's World War I for you.
Can you imagine having a World War III where you almost feels like we might be the Axis powers?
Yeah, we're kind of eking on the way to the bad guys.
Yeah.
It's not great.
Ooh. Yikes.
Well, we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Let's see how many more pedophiles get into the cabinet.
He withdrew.
There's others.
One of them withdrew.
They're all pedophiles.
That's fair.
Anyway, World War I.
Yeah, I was going to say, I didn't know Lisa McMahon had a whole thing behind her.
Oh, yeah.
I was reading about that and I was like, the fuck?
Yeah, that whole family's terrible.
I also love that, it is he's casting a reality series.
100%.
For, does he know that the government is not
real?
A TV show?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? There's almost that question.
Yeah, it's all of his, stupid Hollywood friends.
Right.
And, billionaire friends.
Right. It's the news anchor. At least he has military background, but still, I'm just bro, what?
These people have to know what they're doing, and you can't make up a fucking government agency just for a Doge joke. Anyway.
Well, and government efficiency, and one of his things right now is to eliminate remote workers. And I was just bro.
You can't make that a federal thing.
Correct.
That's fucking stupid.
That's crazy. That would be crazy. Anyway, we'll see what happens.
Anyway, World War I.
About to start my own fucking World War I. Yeah.
So World War I
Yeah.
started after the Austrian Archduke of Franz Ferdinand was assassinated by South Slav nationalist Gavrilo Princip on June 28th, 1914.
Yes.
The war was fought between the Central Powers and the Allies. What's up?
I'm starting to remember the truce thing, I think.
Okay, cool.
But keep going.
The war was fought between the Central Powers and the Allies. The Central Powers being the German Empire, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire. Crazy that, one, there were two empires still around at that time,
Yeah.
but also the Ottoman Empire was still around in 1914.
Nuts.
Wild.
That's crazy. That is crazy.
That always blows my mind. I'm like, what the fuck?
World War One demolished that, isn't it?
I believe so.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
I think World War One was like, okay, no more Ottoman Empire.
Right. You had your run.
Yeah,
We're fine.
Yeah. Centuries.
Yeah.
The Allies had France, Great Britain, Russia, Italy, Japan, and after 1917, the United States joined in on the fun.
Yes.
And to boil the whole conflict down to a burnt pot of an explanation, World War One was essentially a you fucked with me, so I'm going to call my friends over to fuck you up. And then you go, oh yeah? Well, my friends are going to back me up to fuck you up. World War One.
I think you should teach history. You'd get so much done in a semester.
Right?
Oh,
Lesson
yeah.
done.
Yeah.
So there was this shift in power that we kind of talked about with the Ottoman Empire. And there was the shift in the balance of power that had been stable for centuries. And whenever a balance like that becomes unbalanced or even shifts in the slightest, shit will often go down.
Correct.
So it was this terrible, bloody war known as the Great War that was supposed to end all wars.
Surprise.
9 million military personnel died, 23 million were wounded, and an additional 8 million civilians died as casualties of war as well as causes like genocide. And even more died after the war, near the end of the war, with the spread of the Spanish flu.
Oh, right. COVID part 1.
Essentially.
Yeah.
It's like COVID 0.0.
Yeah, exactly.
Alpha version.
Alpha version.
So it was just this massive casualty across the globe.
Yeah.
Awful. And World War I was the first time on a global scale that the rising powers got to show off their new technologies for war. Killing became a science, and the world just wasn't ready for it.
Yeah.
We had horse cavalries charging against tank cavalries. Planes, a 10-year-old invention at the time, were now being used for reconnaissance and as fighters and as bombers for the first time.
A 10-year-old invention? That's nuts.
10 years before this, the Wright brothers were just barely off the ground.
And 110 years later, we have alien technology.
Exactly.
Did you see that Senate hearing?
No.
They had a hearing about, what are they called? Not UFOs anymore. UAPs.
Oh, sure.
Or whatever. But basically, they were like, we have an alien body. And they're like, can you share more? And they're like, classified. And they're like, okay, like, do you have, like, anything else? They're like, we might have some technology. And they were like, do you want to share that with the American people? Classified. Okay, like, who else has this technology? Can't tell you. Classified. And it was just, like, very much like...
What are we doing here?
Right. I was just like...
This is unrelated to, like, the bodies that they showed in court, right? In Mexico?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. This is the little things. Yeah. Well, and it very much came out that, like, oh, yeah, we talked to, like, several different species. Some of them look like us. And so they're like, so was it, like, you could kind of say that, like, they might be amongst us? And they're like, yeah. And I was like, why is everyone being so cavalier about this?
Can we share with the class?
Hello, mainstream media.
Hello?
Hey, so New York Times, instead of posting an op-ed about why we should just, like, cancel all of Trump's cases, how about running about the aliens that we apparently are friends with?
All right.
Crazy. I'm going to write an op-ed. Sorry. Like, tangent. Sorry. But that's crazy. 4 years later, 10 years later.
10 years.
10 years. Still, that's crazy.
Instruments of war.
Yeah.
It was the meeting of 20th century technology with 19th century tactics, and it was brutal.
Yeah.
The Christmas truce generally took place from December 24th to the 26th in 1914, just 5 months after the official fighting started. I get into it later on, but in some areas it was much shorter than that, of that time period, and others lasted through the new year.
Okay.
It was called Weihnachtsfrieden in German, Trêve de Noël in French, and Kurzbestend in Dutch.
Better than my fucking what?
I know.
Now what?
I just needed to show off.
You asshole. You dick.
And it wasn't just in one location on the front lines that held this truce. It was a series of unofficial ceasefires that spread across the entire war front.
Wow.
This truce was a moment in history that reflected the strength of peace and humanity at a time when one of the most violent conflicts in human history was taking place. Now, this wasn't the only time there were unofficial truces happening. There were other moments of peace between enemy lines during the war.
Sure.
Oftentimes, fighting would stop so the armies could collect their dead and wounded, or even when rations were brought up to the front lines, there would sometimes be a moment of peace so everyone could collect their stuff. There were even some like nonverbal agreements of like, hey, if you see some like enemy soldiers like exercising or working and they're not like actively combating you, don't shoot at them. Like, we're gonna live and let live in that moment.
What happened to that sort of like civility, like empathy? Like, where did that go amongst the people?
I think it was probably had a lot to deal with our fighting in like Korea and Nam. And then technology of warfare got to be so I didn't have to see you to kill you.
Oh, yeah.
And I think just... I think the effects of like being Americans killing senselessly in Eastern Asia with all of the chemicals and stuff like that, but then also those soldiers in Eastern Asia, like guerrilla warfare really kind of fucks with you psychologically.
Yeah.
And, like, you kind of have to like drill in your mindset that those aren't people that you're killing, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's kind of where that civility, quote unquote, of warfare disappears.
Got it. Okay. And then permeates into society itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
That'd be my guess. I'm no expert, but
Right.
if I had to take a stab at it.
Different topic, different day.
Right. So like if you were getting rations or working, whatever, they would try not to shoot at you.
Got it.
Bad weather could also cause a halt in fighting, especially when the trenches would flood. You'd be like, I don't know anywhere to stand.
All the rats would come flying in the flooding.
Yeah, disgusting. And none of these truces were sanctioned, and most were actually discouraged by higher-ranking officers on both sides. But the fraternization between the opposing forces continued on during this early part of the war, especially more quiet sectors.
Yeah.
But the Christmas truce was one of the larger, more prominent instances that an incredibly large amount of participants. That had an incredibly large amount of participants, excuse me. And I think to go back to your question is like, I think it might have stopped even sooner than what I said, what I suggested, because I kind of get into it later. But I think the amount of bloodshed that happened in World War I even was kind of like, fuck this, like those aren't my fellow humans anymore. Those aren't my brothers anymore.
Got it. Okay.
There's just so much death and destruction and whatnot that I think it was kind of like, nope, no more.
That kind of cuts it. Yeah.
So the first few weeks of fighting in World War I were extremely intense and unprecedented. Like I said, it was a clash of 20th century tech with 19th century tactics.
Right.
Men and munitions were running low, and with that, morale also plummeted.
Sure.
The French and the British were able to hold off the German push into France through Belgium, stopping the Germans from reaching their ultimate goal of Paris. They tried that again in World War II.
But Paris will never fall. well kind of.
The Germans, believed that if they were able to quickly occupy Paris, they could crush the Franco-British forces and win the war in 40 days, or at least stop fighting the war on two fronts. Because again, Germany is kind of Central Europe, and with Russia and the Eastern Front pushing onto them, they wanted to at least cut off some of the pressure on the Western Front.
Okay.
The Western Front being the French, British, and Belgium.
Right.
So that was unsuccessful. Their push into Paris was unsuccessful. So what then happened is what we call the race to the sea, which was this movement of forces on the Western Front from both sides to see who could outflank their opponent first. And it ended in a stalemate.
Okay.
The Germans needed a new way into Paris after being stopped, and the Allied powers wanted to push back against the Central Powers' assault. So both sides just kept on pushing further north, hoping to gain any sense of forward movement on the front, but they wound up running out of room when they reached the North Sea.
Fuck.
Yeah, so like during this whole time, they're also digging trenches and setting up new front lines for themselves. And so it wound up creating this continuous line of trenches from the North Sea all the way to the Swiss frontier. So just to help kind of picture all this, the distance from my trench to your trench were on average between 50 and 250 yards. Very small distance.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And that land between the trenches, and I'll be mentioning this several times later, is called no man's land. You don't want to be there, you die there.
Right.
And so these trench lines would later on wind up seeing some of the most brutal battles for the rest of the war. You just have this massive, massive line of trenches going all the way up and down. And that's where you kind of sat.
Yeah.
You couldn't go anywhere. And as the year came to a close and the first Christmas of the war drew near, several calls for peace came from civilians. We had Pope Benedict XV pleaded for both sides of the war for an official truce, asking that, quote, the guns may fall silent at least upon the night the angels sang, end quote, which, of course, all parties refused to participate in.
Of course.
And then there was also a group of 101 British women's suffragettes. They addressed a public message, quote, to the women of Germany and Austria called the Open Christmas Letter. This letter was written as a message of peace and acknowledged the horrors of modern warfare.
Sure.
But it was a little bit more interesting than that as well, because it sparked some correspondence between the two groups. Two groups of women, rather, on both sides that promoted the aims of peace and kept these women united in the common goal that they shared, suffrage for women.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty cool.
That is cool.
Now, despite the horrors of war, the proximity that the trenches were built in led to frequent chances of fraternization between the opposing forces. Like I said, it was only maybe closest would be about 50 yards between ourselves. That's very close. So, like, small talk could be shouted across no man's land, which like I said before, is the gap between the trenches.
Yeah.
With many soldiers reporting talking about the weather, singing songs as a form of entertainment or gentle taunting, passing along messages for a sweetheart, or even asking about how the football leagues were performing.
That's crazy.
Football being soccer.
Right, but also the fact that they were still playing.
Right. Well, this was very early on, so I don't think any inscription happened yet.
Sure.
But
what do you call it? But that's still nuts. Like, I think there's a weird, like, compartmentalization of, like, oh, like, we're just like buddies and we're talking, and in 2 hours I'm gonna start trying to kill you again.
Right. Once that sun comes up,
right, like, that's
it's on.
Crazy.
Very much
very
so.
Strange.
And so there would be times when newspapers were exchanged between enemy lines while the truces were held to collect their comrades and rations or whatever, just to, like, be able to spread news around and see what was going on in the rest of the world.
Yeah.
These small instances of humanity allowed, I think, at least for the eventual build-up to this grand moment of peace during Christmas 1914.
Sure.
So all along the Western Front, around 100,000 British and German troops, with others, agreed to end the hostilities for just a few days to celebrate the holiday and remember the human they were facing that sat just in the other trench across the way.
Yeah.
It started off slow, of course, not surely to fully trust this unofficial truce between the opposing forces. Germans wound up setting up candles and trees along their trenches and began singing Christmas carols. The British responded in turn by singing their own carols. Eventually,
Christmas carols? Oh, you said their own carols as if they wouldn't be
also
Christmas
carols. Christmas carols, yeah.
It's like non-religious carols.
Christmas greetings were eventually just shouted back and forth across no man's land until eventually enough trust was built up to give the men courage to stand up and walk across the war-torn fields to exchange gifts like food, tobacco, alcohol, and various souvenirs like buttons and hats, which is crazy.
So weird. So I mean, that's like, it's very sweet and it's very like human,
right?
But it's so strange.
Yeah, one of my I'm not going to say one of my favorite movies, but like a movie that holds a special place in my memory, I suppose. We watched it in French class in, I want to say middle school. It's called Joyeux Noël. It's all about this. It takes place from like a French soldier's perspective. It's all in French because we watched it in French class. Blah, blah, blah. And it was very just like wild to see it happening. Highly recommend it. It's a great movie.
I think there's a clip of this kind of happening in either All Quiet on the Western Front or maybe in 1917, one of those movies. You have this like moment of where they like cross this area and kind of have that truce moment. Yeah. That's crazy.
It's wild.
Yeah.
It's crazy to read some of these first-hand accounts. I'll be reading one now.
Okay.
From Captain Charles Bruce Barnesfather, a prominent humorist and cartoonist who fought for the British Army, wrote the following, quote, "I wouldn't have missed that unique and weird Christmas day for anything. I spotted a German officer, some sort of lieutenant, I should think, and being a bit of a collector, I intimated to him that I had taken a fancy to some of his buttons. I brought out my wire clippers and with a few deft snips removed a couple of his buttons and put them in my pocket. I then gave him 2 of mine in exchange." Just like,
that's thanks.
Hey,
I like your buttons, bro. Like, can we switch them?
Yeah, right?
Right. That's so
bizarre.
Crazy.
So bizarre. But also during this time of truce, recently killed soldiers were brought back to their respective lines to receive proper burials, often receiving joint services from both forces.
Oh, wow.
On the Yser front, which was the part of the Western Front fought over by the Germans and Belgians, Belgian soldiers asked for letters to be sent back to their families that still resided in now German-occupied parts of Belgium. Some men all along the front were, of course, worried that this was a trap. They didn't really trust the other folks across the way.
Sure.
They figured that enemy snipers would just be waiting for their opponents to let their guard down. But throughout the day, not a shot was fired at them, at least in their sector.
Yeah. Wow.
Not even far off artillery fire could be heard. The silence from the lack of warfare was just slowly filled with the sounds of merriment and a few football matches.
That's awesome.
Several attempts at football matches, again, soccer, popped up during the Christmas truce. All accounts have various reports of score and legitimacy.
Of course. Of course.
Some scholars claim that there's no concrete proof that matches were played by opposing forces. There were some played within units, of course.
Sure.
But no one was like, did you actually play with the Germans? While others, though, do insist, like, no, we played against the Germans and we beat them by like 1 or 2 scores.
Sure.
So
I wouldn't be surprised. You know what I mean? Right. I get where scholars have to be like, there's no concrete evidence of that happening, but at the same time, like, I wouldn't be surprised if we're exchanging buttons,
right?
Why couldn't we have
tobacco,
a football,
alcohol,
right? Exactly.
Kick around the ball a little bit,
exactly.
And there were some accounts though too that were like, it was more of like a kick around match instead of an actual like game because the field was so pocked with artillery fire and whatnot.
Yeah, that's fair. It's a little bit more of a scrimmage. Yeah.
Nothing official.
Yeah.
But during this truce, the Allied forces got to learn a lot about their German counterparts. Many wrote that the Germans were, quote, distinctly bored with the war. In fact, one of them wanted to know what on earth we were doing here fighting them, end quote. A Frenchman named Gustave Berthier wrote, quote, on Christmas Day, the Boches, German soldiers, made a sign showing they wished to speak to us. They said they didn't want to shoot. They were tired of making war. They were married like me. They didn't have any differences with the French, but with the English, end quote. Which is interesting.
Well, I think that speaks to just the larger thing about war and generally like military.
Yeah.
It's just like it is fought amongst cowards. You know what I mean? Like a war is a war amongst like cowards in the elite. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just enacted by people.
Yeah.
You know?
It's people behind big desks telling you where to go.
Right, because you talk to the common soldier and they're not like, oh, I know why I'm here and I know why I'm fighting, I know why I'm doing that. It's just like, this is the enemy, this is what I'm being told, and this is where I go, right? And just
unless you're fighting for your freedom against some terrible opposing force.
Correct, unless someone's like trying to actively take over your land.
Right.
Very Ukraine, Russia, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't, most people would be like, no. We're not doing this.
Right.
I'm bored with it, or like, why am I here?
Yeah.
What am I doing? You know what I mean? I feel like that sort of sentiment really permeated through World War I, World War II. You know what I mean? And I think we're seeing even some of that now.
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why all the North Koreans are just jerking off on the Ukrainian-Russian front.
As they do, just along the front. Yeah.
Did you see that though?
No.
Oh. Yeah, this is the first.
Joking.
No, I'm being dead serious.
This is actually
this is the first time they've had access to unrestricted internet, so they're all just looking at porn and jerking off the entire time.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's hilarious.
You were joking.
No,
I
wish I was joking. It's fucking hilarious.
That's
I couldn't have
wild.
written a better joke.
I didn't know that they had pulled North Korea into the fold.
Yeah, China helped out a little bit. Then I think most of China's gone, but then North Korea came in and they're just whacking it.
They're just, fair. Get after it. Get after it. Well, yeah. Anyway.
So, back to World War One.
Incredible.
Now, not everyone participated in the Christmas truce, of course.
Naturally.
Many higher-ranking officers on both sides forbade their units from participating. One Adolf Hitler, to no one's surprise, was one of the many corporals who opposed the truce.
Naturally.
Some parts of the truce only lasted a few moments, as a simple Merry Christmas was shouted from their places of hiding between gunshots, and that was the extent of the truce. Okay. Other areas of the front that celebrated the truce were bookended by the war continuing on. A German lieutenant recalled using his binoculars to observe other battalions exchanging gifts while his own men struggled to maintain the line.
Oh my God.
Captain Robert Miles of the Royal Irish Rifles had a letter published in the Daily Mail that recalled the following, quote, "We are having the most extraordinary Christmas day imaginable, a sort of unarranged and quite unauthorized but perfectly understood and scrupulously observed truce exists between us and our friends in the front. The funny thing is, it only seems to exist in this part of the battle line. On our right and left, we can all hear them firing away as cheerfully as ever. The thing started last night, a bitter cold night with white frost. Soon after dusk, when the Germans started shouting, 'Merry Christmas, Englishmen,' to us, of course, our fellows shouted back, and presently large numbers of both sides had left their trenches, unarmed. The men were all fraternizing in the middle and swapped cigarettes and lies in the utmost good fellowship. Not a shot was fired all night." End quote. Captain Robert Miles was KIA on December 30th, 1914. So just right after.
Yep.
Stories of the truce were not immediately reported to the public, but eventually news spread quite quickly.
Sure.
Pictures and letters were soon published to main news sources with a mostly positive message, spread to the public as, quote, "one of the greatest surprises of a surprising war," end quote.
Yeah.
Other reports in certain countries were held back by national censors, but were eventually forced to fully tell the story of the truce as the rumors spread across Europe. It was kind of more of like a national security thing, but whatever.
Sure.
Whatever.
Just throwing it out there.
Other truces were attempted throughout the war, but none as successful as the Christmas truce of 1914. Easter Sunday, 1915, Germans attempted to repeat the truce they experienced just a few months before, but the English forces turned them away. Some Orthodox folk on the Eastern Front actually did stop and celebrate Easter for themselves, but it wasn't as big of an event as the Christmas truce of 1914.
Sure.
By 1916, truces were no longer tolerated of any kind by the commanding officers or the soldiers themselves. The war had made them all bitter after the massive amount of losses all sides experienced during the bloody battles of 1915.
I mean, that's fair. I get that. Yeah.
This war, if you're from the Germans' perspective, it's like it's only going to last 40 days, maybe.
Right.
here we are 2 years
Years
later.
later. Like, yeah, I'd be
From
pissed
the
too.
ally side, fuck, this is going on for 2 years. Like, why haven't you stopped? Why aren't we able to stop you?
Right.
The legacy of this truce, however, has lived on over the decades. Like I said, there was movies, Joyeux Noel, and many others, monuments, songs, and even reenactments have been made and produced to commemorate this massive historical event. There's even the Midway Village Museum in Rockford, Illinois, for you fellow Illinoisians out there.
Excuse me?
That reenacts the Christmas truce every year. Check out their website for more information.
What? They just reenact.
They do. I went to their website. I was like, no fucking way.
Right.
They do so many reenactments and like have a great like extent of fun stuff to do there. So
Interesting.
I didn't know there was a lot else to do out in Rockford.
When do they do that?
So they reenact the Christmas truce every year around this time.
Okay.
Sometime like in the middle of December.
Okay.
But then they just do other events too.
Should we go?
We should go.
We should probably go see the Christmas truce done by Americans.
Yeah. Right. You know, the Americans that had nothing to do with you
Correct.
at this time.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, that is the tale of not the tale, but the story of the Christmas truce
Yeah.
of 1914 during World War I. Something that will never happen again.
Right. Correct. I do think there is just like this like human like instinct, human hope within that just so quickly gets like demolished by war.
Yeah. I think since it was able to happen within just the first few weeks, months of the war, things were kind of a little bit lighter in tone.
Totally.
Because I mean, like throughout the war, technology just kept on advancing. War sparked some of the greatest inventions, unfortunately.
Right.
But like, I think just since it happened so early, if Christmas had been like near the end of the year for the war, like if Christmas happened like 11 months into the war or whatever, I think it would have been no, fuck you,
Right.
we're done.
Right. It just kind of timed
I think so.
to the
yeah.
newness of something of this magnitude.
Yeah, absolutely. This type of warfare and Christmas happening at the same time is like,
Yeah.
we can take a moment.
Yeah. Well, thanks for telling the story, Dev. There's a little bit of like cheer in that, in a dark kind of way.
Yeah, it's both cheerful and sorrowful.
Yeah. All at the same time.
Yeah, because then you think of that guy of the Irish Rifles who was like, this is so great,
Yeah.
dies 3 days later.
Yeah.
4 days later, whatever. So it's just like, woof.
Oh, yeah. But yeah, what a way to step us into the
World War One.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's World War One. That's a Christmas truce.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. Make sure to like, subscribe, and do all that stuff everywhere on the internet at WDYK_podcast. Send us a message. Send us your holiday wishes. And from all of us here at WDYK to you, happy holidays, happy new year. Well, I mean, we'll see you throughout the entire time.
Totally.
I don't know when I'm recording next. So,
But happy holidays.
happy holidays.